It's been suggested, I mean, you don't have to take part in this poll if you don't want to, but it's just been suggested it would be interesting to find out the spread of opinion or belief or non-belief in the audience. So how many of you would describe yourselves as atheists? Okay. And you're humanists as well? Yeah, okay. And many of you would describe yourself as theists. Yeah,
that
theists.
Believe in God.
Yeah, believe in God. Okay. How many of you would describe yourselves as agnostics? Yeah, we're actually a pretty balanced outfit. That's quite interesting. How many would describe themselves as Christian agnostics? Yeah. As any humanist agnostics? Yeah, good. Well, I think this is a very Catholic audience. Are there any Roman Catholics here? Apart from the two mavericks on my... Yeah. No. The way we're going to do this, we're going to have a wee bit of a panel discussion here. I've allowed each panel member to ask another panel member a single question, and I reserve the right myself maybe to ask one at the end, and then we're going to throw it open. And we'll see how that goes. And we're going to do it in reverse order of the speakers. And so the first question will come from Gary, and I'm not sure where it's going, Gary, but okay.
I guess I would like to ask either of my Christian friends.
Well, there are three of us, kind of.
Well, actually,
I'm kind of a Christian.
I did actually want to ask you a question, Richard, but I wasn't sure if it was in keeping with the format. But anyway, I'll put the question out there, and whoever feels inspired or moved to answer it can do it. So, Richard, you said at the start that you were interested to see that people like Sanderson Jones with the the Sunday Assembly had been reinventing church to, as you said, fill a gap. Do you not think, though, that the people who started church were indeed filling a gap that was left by something, and that Christianity and religion itself could be seen as a man-made structure to fill a gap left by other man-made structures, and that you've got it the wrong way around?
Okay, and do you want Russell or Liam to answer that?
I'm going to ask Russell a question, so if Liam can, that'd be better.
Okay, Liam.
Right. On the one hand, I would say that, yes, the way in which different groups and different movements develop and gain strength is based upon the relative strength or weakness of other groups in society. So yes, you're completely correct. It was to do with the weakness of pagan religion, of the Roman Empire, that Christianity found a way in. And there was all sorts of weaknesses. There were philosophical ones, there was actually sociological ones, the way in which they didn't actually care for the poor in a very good way. That was one of the main reasons when the church became popular. The way in which it didn't reflect the growing individualization of the period, and also the growing belief that there was only one God. I mean, there was actually kind of natural movement in paganism towards that. I don't think, however, that means that all religions are man-made or are simply human projections or something. I think that you can completely believe in providence. Providence is the idea that God has a hand in history and directs it towards some purpose, a good purpose. While nevertheless accepting all of the sociological and economic factors that went into raising up Christianity, in which now seem to be leading to Christianity's demise. I don't think there's a contradiction to each other. Certainly in my own studies, I look at the growth of atheism within Britain and America, and I adopt a purely historical causation principle for that. I'm not trying to look for divine hand-stepping all the time. I don't think they're opposed to each other. So I think that the presupposition of the question is misguided.
Okay. I'm going to answer it as well a bit. It seems to me that in terms of Christianity, Christianity probably started declining when it was adopted by Constantine, the emperor, because what he then did was the poor man of Nazareth, who'd been crucified by the Roman Empire, was then turned into a Roman emperor. And what I think has happened since is that Jesus has haunted Christianity for the next 1700 years, but has not ruled it. And I think that probably happens to most religions. They bring a kind of an idea, a vision into the world, it gets organized, and power always takes it over, because the conjunction of power and religion is probably the most potent of the conjunctions. And I mean, Gibbon was quite good in that. There's a bit in Decline and Fall when he says that the philosophers didn't believe any of it, the people believed all of it, and the magistrates found it equally useful because they could use religion to do almost anything. And the question I'd like to ask Liam is that given that in the DNA of Christianity in particular, there have been centuries of power, one of the problems we are having at the moment is dealing with our own diminishing power, hence all the talk. I mean, the irony of George Carey, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, calling a meeting in the House of Lords to protest about the persecution of Christianity and completely failing to capture the irony of what he was doing. And don't you think there's too much of that at the moment? That all these letters in Scotsman about aggressive secularity, making it... No one's being persecuted in this country, but there is this persecution complex at the moment around Christianity.
Yes. I'll begin with your first point about the relationship between power and the church. One of the most interesting things I've discovered in the course of reading lots of books is that one of the major factors for the growth of atheism and free thinking in Britain and America has been the state church. And when you have a situation where, on the one hand, you're saying to the new Protestants, well, you know, we started this Reformation so you can read the Bible for yourself. And then 2 minutes later you're saying, well, actually, we're going to tell you how to read the Bible. And in fact, if you come to a different conclusion to us, we're going to persecute you, we're going to lock you up, we're going to close your churches down, and we're going to, you know, in addition to that, you can't go to university, you can't run for public office. The state church has been the driving factor for free-thinking atheism and anti-Christian thought in Britain. And that's why, up until recently in America, they had a very different situation, because they didn't have the state-church connection. So on the whole, while it has brought some temporal advantages, some worldly advantages to Christianity, the connection between political power and religion has been dreadful. Dreadful. I agree with you as well about the persecution thing. I think Rowan Williams actually said this, to bring Rowan Williams thing again. He said the idea that, you know, when someone disagrees with you, you're being persecuted is just silly. You know, people who are murdered in their beds by Boko Haram, that's persecution. You know, when you're locked up in a mental institution because you're religious, as happened in Eastern Europe during the communist days, that's persecution. This isn't persecution. But my concern, and it's not actually one that I personally share, is for the other Christians who are feeling marginalised. I study fundamentalism as well. And what happened in fundamentalism in America was that a once dominant evangelical culture, which controlled everything, starts to become under pressure from growing secularization. And the first place it happened was in the education system. And basically, while not all Christians are affected this way, a large number of conservative Christians, when they are confronted with criticism and they start to lose positions they have, become more and more fundamentalist and antagonistic towards both anti-religious people and non-religious people and wider society. My concern is simply this, that we do not want to have a situation in the future where we have yet another religious group which is inimical and antagonistic towards wider society. We don't want that. And so all I'm suggesting is that while it's absolutely appropriate and very good, and it comes back to that at the end of my talk, very good that we're criticised and questioned about our position in society. It has to be done in the right way. Because if it's not done in the right way, if it's done angrily and aggressively, it can lead to some sections of the church becoming fundamentalist and at least increasing social polarisation, and I don't want that.
Good. Russell, next one to you. To whom?
To Gary. Yeah. It's more a comment than a question. I didn't write down your exact wording, but there was something about when we discuss human flourishing, we do so on your turf, or on, meaning humanist turf. Can we change that to our turf? So that, in a sense, for me, the hope of the world is hyphenated humanism. What we need is humanist values, but we'll come at it from different angles. If you think of the Hebrew Bible, the way Marxists, for example, have always been fascinated by the radical social element in the scripture. Didn't like the God bit, but liked that. That indicates that there's that dimension there. So, humanism for me, or the idea of human flourishing, is not something that I add to my Christian faith and then come and have a wee word with you. It's integral, it's a core part of who I am, but I accept that you're a secular humanist and that you're part of how contemporary organised humanism wants to self-define itself. I have no problems with that. I don't want to what's the word? Not a turf war, or I'm not trying to do away with secular humanism. I accept that that's the way modern humanism is. But when we discuss human flourishing, which I hope we can do, we're not meeting in your turf, we're meeting in our turf. That's all I want to say.
I think what I was trying to say is that when we discuss who we are, what we say and how we identify, I do think there is a distinction between those who think that this is what there is and those who think that, or hope that there is something else. I think there is quite a clear distinction there. It's a blurred line, but I think that those two identities do exist. And the point I was trying to make was that whilst there is much we can disagree about, and I think that those disagreements are very interesting, and I think that we should definitely have those disagreements, when we come together to do things, and it's in the action that I think we are probably most concerned about cooperation. In those actions can only ever exist in the material universe, in this world in which we inhabit, and that is the humanist view of what it is to human flourishing exists only in the here and now. We are materialists. We believe in that this universe that we can experience is the sum of human experience, and that all human phenomenon is in some way related to that material existence. So I was trying to make a cheeky point about Richard worrying that we were going to get on too well. But at the same time, I do think that it is clear that if we want to come together and with Liam stand up for the freedom of expression for religious people around the world, and these aren't academic conversations, there are people around the world, our brothers and sisters, from different religion and belief backgrounds who are being murdered. This is not an academic conversation, but we must concede that if we're ever to do anything constructive together as two different movements of people, we can only enter into that with the appreciation that the material existence and the material well-being of human citizens in this world today is what comes first and foremost, and that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Tim, your turn. Oh, you've got your own.
Question. I was interested by the fact that you admitted that Christianity has abused dominant position up until now. One of the issues we discussed was education, and I think most people think that still having unelected religious representatives on council education committees would have been appropriate in the 17th century, but really isn't now. Do you not think that the church should just kind of move away from this? The church seems to put itself in positions where it's looking so ludicrously out of touch with how the world currently works that it just it confounds those of us who are not of it. You go, why do you do that? So, on that specific question, unlettered religious groups, what do you think?
Well, I'm not the best person to speak on the Church of Scotland because I'm a wee bit of a rebel. I don't go to assemblies and things like that, so I don't know what this current state, what they've decided this week. I'm not even quite sure. As a minister, I have been invited, and it's always been invited, into schools to speak, sometimes to classes or to assemblies. And I have really mixed feelings about it. Usually if it's an assembly, it's a disaster because you're trying to speak to the older kids and the younger ones, and you get this wee slot. It's like they're ticking a box, so they've got to have this minister in, and he comes in, and it's an impossible situation.
With respect, that's not what I'm asking about, because I do go to school and talk to children. I'm talking about the position of unelected religious representatives on the education committees of councils. Do you think this is a good thing for the church, or do you think it actually makes it look as though it's hanging on to power and that I'm going to join?
Well, it depends why they're there. If there's a market for people coming in to speak on behalf of religions as part of the educational system, then you've got to have some kind of representation here. Whether it's, if you get some schools like to have Muslim representatives come in to speak. If they're coming in to speak in an educational situation, then I presume there should be some representation on the council.
Isn't the problem that history is a movie that's running, and we've come in to our bit of it, and you can never actually stop and start again. And one of the things about history, the history of education in Scotland, is it was largely something done by the church until not very long ago. So inevitably you get residues of all of that. It's very untidy. And I doubt if you can ever start again with a blank page. My own anxiety about the situation is allowing new faith schools to start up. I think you can inherit the untidiness of the past, Catholic schools, other kind of religion in schools, but to invent new versions of it, I think, is a mistake myself. I would allow the untidiness of history to run, including maybe representatives in these boards. I think time will take care of it. But for political reasons, I think politicians allow faith communities to have their own schools, and some of them have actually turned out to be quite complicated. You get a question now, Liam.
I'm going to return the favour to Gary and ask him a question. Both in your talk and in your response to the questions there, I was noticing two beliefs or assumptions I found quite interesting. The first one is that there's quite a strict divorce between people who look for an afterlife and people who are looking for this life. And the second distinction was that because we live in a material universe, there's a distinction between the material universe and the spiritual universe. And that because we can prove the material, that belongs to humanists or to non-religious people. I'd just like to kind of question both of those beliefs. First of all, the belief that you're either somebody who looks for the next life or for this one. I mean, I don't think there's any Christian who only hopes for the next life. And we're instructed not to do that, in fact. Jesus is quite strict about this. He says, you shouldn't just be looking after yourself. You have to care for people in the here and now. I mean, love God and love your neighbour. So at least 50% of the Christian life should be looking after other people, which clearly means in this material universe. And secondly, even if, I do believe in a transcendent reality, it doesn't mean that the material world belongs to humanists. I find that like a really strange idea, or no to non-religious people. It clearly belongs to all of us. And, my fear is that that's simply replicating the old Christian model, which was like, we're the church, this is God's world, we are God's representatives, therefore we get to tell you what to do. And now it seems to be, well, because this is the material world, we're the humanists, and therefore we get to... Obviously I'm exaggerating a bit, but that's my fear. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
You're determined to prove that we're secretly Christians, Liam. Let me reassert my position. I hope I've not used language like belongs, because I think that language is misguided. My position is that, and I tried to make a joke about it because it's very difficult to examine. I mean, there's been tomes of books and lives dedicated to these questions, so we can only do so much in the short time we have. There are two positions, one being that this material life universe that we inhabit is the sum of our experiences, and that we must find meaning, love, wisdom, justice from amongst ourselves within this universe. That's one view. And the other view, which I try to lay out, is that you have that, and then there's another layer. There's another layer that can be penetrated through various different religions and spiritual things. Now, I'm not trying to say that the material universe belongs in any way, I don't even understand how it could, to those of us who inhabit the first worldview. If anything, the religious worldview encompasses more, because it encompasses the reality of the material universe and then the imagined one, from my point of view. So I hope that clarifies the situation slightly. The material versus spiritual argument is one which is probably more contentious because there are one of your colleagues at the New College, Anthony Allison, did a survey recently, you probably know about, with Mona Siddiqui, and he found out that it wasn't, I don't think you might be saying this, it wasn't the most robust sampling, if I can put it as politely as that. He found out that a lot of people in Scotland who call themselves humanists also inhabit some form or another of spiritual dimension, or they identify to have some form of spiritual dimension. Now, I've had many a sober and drunken conversation with my humanist and secularist and atheist friends about the meaning of the word spirituality. To me, there only is one form of spirituality, and that's the one that you drink. But I realise that to a vast number of other people, there's something in the examination of broad concepts such as love, truth, happiness. There is something within these which is transcendental and which identifies more than with a purely materialist point of view. So I'm completely open to concede that the point is not as binary as I tried to make it out. But I do think that there is still a broad grouping which is useful in this conversation, which is those of us who are materialists and those of us who are spiritualists. And all I'm trying to set out is that humanism is the worldview which tries to base itself around those of us who inhabit the materialist worldview, whereas I can fully admit that there are a vast range of religions and spiritual belief systems which inhabit both the material world and also the spiritual world. So I think the distinction is useful, but it's also blurred when you start to investigate it.
And there are some very interesting variants on it, because one of the big debates in science at the moment is between whether the brain and the mind are coexistent, consubstantial. You've got reductive neurologists who say that everything is simply chemistry. My experience of myself is chemistry plus transcendence. And I think the world's a weird place, because it's not only matter, but it's produced poetry and music and compassion and spirituality. And I don't think you can reduce it and argue from that, but it's a bloody weird place to be in. And that's what keeps me on the edge of transcendence. I don't think you can explain Elgar's cello concerto simply on the basis of catgut and elmwood or rosewood. I mean, there is something inhabits it, and something inhabits the universe, and it's what keeps a lot of us not in any position at all, but simply enjoying it, including the material side of it, but something else in it haunts it. Anyway, enough from me. We've got 40 minutes for contributions and questions, and we've got a one. Are you going to do, Liam? That's decent of you. You're going to do the.
No, I'm going to pass it to my colleague. I'm going to pass the box to someone else.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody asked me a question.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, do you want to?
Oh, see, you're in charge of the mic. I thought you were going to ask a question. Right, yes. Okay, yeah.
Could I pick up Tim on his comment about in Northern Ireland, you can't even bake a cake in support of gay marriage or same-sex marriage. Yeah. I don't want to sidetrack onto the rights and wrongs of this, but I feel there are much deeper issues that humanists of all people should be concerned about, of freedom of speech and belief, and freedom to run your business in accordance with your beliefs. I think it's a dangerous precedent if you imagine the boot was on the other foot, and as a humanist you're running a business and you have some fundamentalist Christian coming in asking you to make a t-shirt with some slogan that you deeply object to, and you refuse to do it, and they then take you to court and you get fined, and maybe if you're not very well off you have to close down your business and your livelihood. I think there are extreme issues of concern about our freedoms there. If you could comment on that, please, Tim.
Thank you. What's your name?
Alison.
Thank you, Alison. It is an interesting question. We have human rights now, and we have freedom of expression, and they do come into conflict. And I think that this case, where somebody's belief conflicts with their business interests, is an interesting one. But I don't think it's a threat to religious liberty at all. I think it, and most cases of particularly Christian complaints of persecution, actually amount to trying to hang on to rights that they, until very recently, had to discriminate against others. The overwhelming fact is that these claims are not just groundless but distasteful, and compared to the kind of persecution that Christians are suffering in Muslim countries like Iraq, or people like the Yazidis, who are being killed for their different beliefs. It's not martyrdom, it is the price of living in a civilized society.
Anyone else want to comment on that? I mean, I agree in theory with Tim, but I think it was using a wheel to crush a butterfly, frankly. I think you
the
can't...
butterfly put itself up to be crushed.
Yeah, but you can't do everything by law. What do you think?
Yeah, at first glance, it was the idea of the slogan. And when I first saw it in the news, I thought, well, imagine somebody who was an animal rights person and the Cape had a slogan, bring back fox hunting or something. But then I thought, well, hang on a minute. Supposing it wasn't the slogan, supposing it was just the names of the two, I think it was a gay wedding, was it? So the names of the two guys. So it's obviously a cake for a gay wedding. Would they still have refused that? And that's the question I don't know, because if that's the case, then it goes beyond just not agreeing with this slogan, but it actually takes a stand on the whole idea of that wedding taking place, which of course is now legal and is a human right.
Seeing as I got the question, I think there are various versions of Protestantism, and Northern Ireland's version is uglier than ours. It is much more fundamentalist. It is much, it is much more homophobic. It's much more, Islamophobic, generally unpleasant. And I think that you would hope that it's not, if you like, where Christianity is going. If I take Liam's argument that if basically, don't make me angry, you wouldn't like it if I got angry, that is where we end up. And actually, there have probably been a number of cases where people have refused a gay couple to stay in their B&B, and similar things like this. That's just old-fashioned homophobia. We have fought for years to overcome that and treat people equally. Black, white, gay, transgender, bald, you name it. And these are really important rights.
Okay, anyone else? Next question? Yeah.
I'd just like to ask a question.
Yeah, no, we're getting a mic. Yeah.
I'd just like to ask a question related to that. So I'm just curious, the people on the platform of the humanist persuasion, if I wanted to imagine you were event planners and I wanted to host an Easter celebration, which meant a dance along George Street, and I came to your company and I asked you to arrange that event, would you do it?
An Easter celebration?
Yeah, presumably, if I was an event organiser, yeah, of course I would. It would be my job. It would be. I spent the early part of my career working in the council, where I provide education and social work, where I would never dream of entertaining the possibility of refusing a service to someone because I disagreed with their sexuality, their philosophical beliefs. It's an absurdity to me. The crocodile tears from these people about this imagined offence to them will be forgotten in history, and the march toward progress and equality will be remembered, and that's the important perspective to have on these matters. So I think it's a complete non-issue. And I think that, again, the news today coming through on Facebook and Twitter is that Ireland has voted 2-1 to legalise equal marriage, and we're sitting next to the person in Scotland who in 1972 conducted the first ever same-sex marriage, which is an important point to be remembered.
So if I'm talking about Easter as a celebration of the resurrection of Christ, so would you be happy to arrange that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. When I have an invite, I was at a Catholic Mass only a few weeks ago when one of my very, very best friends from school asked me to be an usher at his Catholic service for his wedding. And of course, I would never dream of, for my kind of narrow philosophical interests, of offending him on his wedding day and things like that. And it just doesn't enter.
The trouble with all of this, and I speak as someone who spent his life in religion.
Can't hear you.
Am I not on? Yeah. Can you hear me? The trouble is, religion has spent centuries telling people what was sinful, what it couldn't do. It couldn't ordain women, it couldn't marry divorced people, it couldn't allow gay people to have sexual relationships. And within a matter of years, history has corrugated, and religious people are now having to reverse their attitude to all of that. And it's quite difficult for many of them. I felt sorry for the couple in the Highlands that ran the B&B and didn't, they'd been told until fairly recently that for men to make love to men was sinful, and history has kind of overtaken them. So a wee bit of compassion, I think, for them, while I agree that their attitudes were terrible, they were taught they were of God. And so we're asking religious people to do some incredible somersaults in a very, very short space of time. And I think maybe we should be a wee bit more patient about it. But next question, there's a question there. Yeah.
As long as I can remember, humanists have been discussing the place of religion in education. So long ago I probably had no hair. But it's now still called religious moral education, religious and moral and philosophical, etc. Can we not just call it philosophy? Just scrap all that and start it in primary schools?
Liam, do you want to have a go on that one? Scrap it and call it philosophy.
So just to clarify, are you saying you want to get rid of education about religion, or are you saying that we should just call it philosophy? Okay. Right. I can see why that would be attractive, because it would allow people to learn about religion, but not in a very divisive way or like in a charged way. I think we need to kind of face reality, which is sort of like people have specific traditions and specific beliefs, which aren't easily brought under the umbrella of philosophy per se. There's certainly philosophical elements in the Christian faith. Some forms of Christian faith are more philosophically orientated than others, but I think we need to just kind of face reality that we live in a pluralist society, which means that there are lots of different specific traditions current. And therefore I think that while we need to be very sensitive in that context about how we do things, I don't think the solution is to try and pretend that they're all aspects of the same thing, aspects of philosophy or aspects of one religion. I think there's all sorts of different religions and different beliefs, and it's trying to win an education system that's attentive both to the specifics of the religion, while nevertheless doing it in a way that isn't charged and isn't violent, isn't confrontational. And I think we're still navigating that. I think it's a very, very complicated issue.
Do you want to have a wee go at that, or are you happy to leave it there?
I'll leave it.
Yep. Question there? Yep. No, we've got a... Yep.
You're all being far too nice to each other. I think we're going to actually have a robust discussion. And on the education part, of course, it's the Jesuits. Give me the boy until he's 7 and I'll give you the man. And that's what the religious people can't give up. We should get away from all forms of state-organised religion in state schools and religions for families. It's not for educational environment. Philosophy is for the development of the human mind. And I think that argument will very rapidly progress.
These two guys got away from a Jesuit education, so...
If I could speak, as a matter of fact, if you want to make somebody a Scientologist, bring them up an atheist. What happens is human beings start to think for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think we would agree with you that children should be taught about all religions and beliefs in school. It's incredibly important. But what we should not do is, if you like, bring children. We don't have conservative children or Labour children or even SNP children. We have children.
Indeed. The other thing was the contention that humanists are a product of the Reformation. I mean, my God, Lucretius and Aristotle, Confucius would be turning in their graves, my goodness. I mean, what a presumption to assume that these people never existed. You revel in a Christian statement, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. 800 years before that, Confucius said, don't do unto others that which you would not have done to yourself. You know, why is it that you have this blinkered attitude to the development of the human experience? And in the early days, of course, Jesus was a millennialist Jew. He wasn't against the Romans. He was actually against his fellow Jews. He was their next prophet. He didn't claim to be anything really much more than that. And was so convinced that the end of the world was coming, he told his followers not to get married because they wouldn't have time to have children. It would be the wrong time to do it. And he was so utterly wrong with that. Why is it that you can't understand that he was probably utterly wrong with everything else he said?
There's a very unsubtle point of view. You have go, because you're half a heretic, isn't it? Now, I think that's probably...
No, that's...
You've covered a whole seminar's topics there.
You can't have a hyphenated humanist if, before the hyphen, becomes a theism.
Nonsense. Okay. Right?
Right, well, I think I disagree with the last one. Human beings are diverse, pluralistic people. I said I was an existentialist. The existential question is, how do we say yes to life? And all the great philosophers who are existentialists, the reason there's insecurity and angst in human nature is because there's uncertainty and there's diversity. And that's overcome by determined action and committed belief to something that compels you or inspires you, or something you believe to be true. But there's no certainty here. Now, because human beings are diverse, you get a whole range of things. Theism is not superstitious nonsense. It's there before religion ever got started. And it will be there if religion even ever dies out, which I don't think it will, because it's a social construct as well. And human beings need it. Or they need something similar to that. So there is no certainty here. And I made the reference to Martin Gardner being one of the founders of the Skeptical Society, but a philosophical theist. Now, he wasn't an idiot, highly respected person. So there's diversity, but if we want to talk about human flourishing, we're coming at it from a range of backgrounds, and that's going to be accepted. Or you're just going to be like, communist societies and kind of hammer everybody into a monolithic structure. If you allow human freedom, you have to allow people to come away with opinions, beliefs of politics, religion, philosophy, art, music, that you think, that's crazy. I'm a highie. How could any follow Jambos? I have no idea why it's a mystery, but they exist. And that's the beauty of human life. And human flourishing is accepting that we will come at it from different point of views. Your view on Jesus is, quite frankly, quite superficial. And the amount of volumes on the quest for the struggle with Jesus, and Richard will know this, is highly complex and very detailed. And I say this to my fellow Christians as well, that any simplistic understanding of Jesus is just not on. You have to do the homework. But if Jesus was who you say he was, all he was against his fellow Jews, why was he crucified? He was crucified because the Romans obviously saw him as a threat. And I'll stop there. I won't get into all that. But that's important as well, because his kingdom movement was something that threatened.
Now, they're all wanting to have a go. Gary, you have a go.
I think the question is an interesting one, because I think, again, let's just remember that there is a distinction here between the academic discussion about the concepts of humanism and Christianity, and then there's also the very real conversation about what we do about the world we live in just now. And the academic conversation, I think this might be, I was sure Tim and I disagreed about something, and I think this might be it. And I think this might be the bit that I don't believe that hyphenated humanism is in any way helpful. I don't think it's something, I don't think you can be a Christian humanist. And we disagree. So we do disagree on something, so that's good.
You've got a Christian humanist sitting between us.
Yes, okay, yeah, but then again, I think...
Do you deny his material existence?
I made very clear...
It is fading as we speak.
I made very clear that Richard has embodied the very magnificent principles of humanism which I aspire to. But there is a difference between the identification of humanism and Christianity and the practical how you go about doing it. For me, as I've tried to set out, I don't think it's helpful. If like me, you're a humanist, you believe in the worth, dignity and autonomy of the individual to the greatest possible freedom compatible with freedom of others, in that statement there is no room for God. There's no room to say, I believe in the greatest freedom of humans compatible with the freedom of others, apart from God who's a bit more equal. That doesn't fit for me. It's not good enough. It has to be fundamentally about the greatest possible human endeavour and human experience and human happiness and flourishing. That's it. There is no room for God in that equation. Some people have a different view, and that's fine, but I don't. To me, that isn't humanism. It's something else. It may be a very liberal form of Christianity, but it's something else. However, when we come together in the world and do things, we can get on very well, and we can do the things together, and we leave aside this academic discourse about, oh, which one are you, and how do you call that, and which, that doesn't matter anymore, because it's about the here and now and what we do. So I think we need to keep that distinction in mind.
I'm going to let one of you, I don't want to dominate up here, so I'll come back in a minute. The front row here, then the back. Yeah. We don't get many questions from women, do we? So let's...
Okay. Bearing in mind the somewhat provocative subtext of friend or foe, I've got a question for Tim Maguire. How should humanists respond when they see their Christian neighbours preach intolerant values? Or in other words, how do we deal with that paradox of tolerance?
Sorry, can I just check what I think you said? How do I deal with if Christians are being intolerant? How should we deal with that? I think I take A.C. Grayling's line, which is that the only thing of which we are intolerant is intolerance. Humanists oppose intolerance. That's we stand up for equality and social justice. We campaign for equal marriage. We campaign for the right of people to have assisted suicide. We stand up for human rights around the world, as Gary has talked about. So, yeah, we oppose it. We will speak against intolerance, and we will celebrate as an island when intolerance is defeated by a recognition that we are all equal, which I think Jesus would probably have said too. Actually, can I just go back to the hyphenate humanist thing, because Gary and I do disagree about this. It is obvious, if you can't say, Richard has done more for humanism than anybody else, without accepting that he's a Christian humanist. I interviewed him in 2008 for the Society's magazine, and I remember asking him, because humanists go, how come you're not a humanist? How come you're still being a Christian? And he says, I'm a reverse hypocrite. I don't preach what I practice. He said, a lot of my early mentors were gay priests, and I can remember them saying to me, you were accepted precisely because you are unacceptable. You are loved because you are unlovable. Early Christianity was a religion of the outcasts. Jesus surrounded himself with sinners and understood the brokenness of humanity. And he said, more misery and disillusionment has been visited upon humanity by its search for the perfect society and the perfect faith than any other cause. I'm a humanist because I want to reach out beyond the things which divide us to find what unites us, as I said earlier on. I don't care what you call yourself. I care what you do. So, how many angels can dance in heaven? This kind of hyphenated humanist thing, I couldn't give up. I really couldn't.
Question there? Yeah.
Hi, I suppose I'm quite new to humanism, but I'm thinking that it reminds me a lot of early Buddhism, and that originally, in the life of the Buddha, that Buddhism, or the teaching of the Buddha, was an enhancement to other religions, and it wasn't a religion, it was an add-on. It was an add-on, and it was taught to enhance your life, to enhance other religions, and to answer some questions, and it was an inquiry into the human condition. And I suppose that I see humanism as that, but when we're looking at humanism and Christianity, it somehow seems other, and to me, it shouldn't really be other. It should be an enhancement and a practical reality that exists in all religions.
I think that doesn't need a response. Quite a good statement. Yep. Back there. Yep. And then we'll come here. Yep.
I trust that none of the panel would deny the contribution to human welfare that Christians, even ugly Northern Irish Christians, have contributed to the planet through missionary endeavours and through aid and through charity and through education, etc., etc. It's wholly compatible with the Christian faith to do good to all. However, speaking to Mr. McClelland, would divide away from any good outside of the here and now materialistic world. The Apostle Paul himself wrote of the Christian faith, if in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men most to be pitied. His point is simply this, that charity is not enough, and education is not enough, and to give people hope of clean water, and hope of decent medicine, and hope of fair treatment in life, this life, is not enough if we don't also give them a hope of everlasting life based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, the question for Mr. McClelland is simple. Would you discount all the contribution to human welfare that Christianity has made, or would seek to make on the basis of that additional thing which makes Christianity what it is?
No. I think the idea that, I completely don't understand your question. I think that the Christians throughout ages have done, especially in the expansion of Christianity into Europe, brought untold material wealth to the citizens of Europe, as Liam outlined. And I think that's all good. As I tried to say, I think when we work together as human beings to improve the material well-being of human beings around the world, I think that's exactly what we should be doing. That, for me as a humanist, that's part of the reason we're here. The reason that we have decided to attribute progress and human flourishing are exactly those things. What I think the church could be better advised to do is to continue those things, but to realise that they are worth something for their own right, and it doesn't require any supernatural justification. It doesn't require anything else. It's enough as it is. To go from providing material wealth and assistance and aid to people in need is good enough. You don't have to add on lies about the afterlife.
Excuse me, but the point of the Apostle Paul was simply this, that to help people, if we really want to help people, it's eternal help. And that's what Christianity brings.
I'm going to go to Liam. We got your point. Liam, are we miserable if we don't believe in an afterlife?
Well, it's simply an empirical fact. People are not miserable if they don't believe in an afterlife. But I think it really is an important point. It comes back, I might just go to tease out the question that's still raised here as well. Let's look at all the institutions that were funded by the church and did not exist prior to the church. Orphanages, universities, public hospitals, relief for the poor. None of these things existed prior to, no, they didn't, because... No. I'm going to come to the point. The point is this, that prior to Christianity, these things were the preserve of the rich, and were given to the rich either to make themselves look good. So, for example, if you were a wealthy Roman matron, you might establish a school for girls, but the thinking behind that wasn't really charitable. And I'm not just trying to put a spin on this, it really wasn't. It was to aggrandize that person. It was only with the church that you really had this genuinely altruistic effort to give things to people, to give them knowledge, to give them health, irrespective of their wealth, irrespective of their status. I don't find that in any, well, no, I'm being completely objective. When I read Roman history, I do not find that. That came in with the church. And so, it comes back to the point we earlier about this division between, the spiritual and material. I think that when you strive for the spiritual, you end up getting material as well. But perhaps it's debatable, perhaps when you just strive for the material, you give something even less than the material. I don't know. But let's come back very quickly, let's address this man's point. Yes, you're completely right, those ideas did exist prior to Christianity. Don't doubt that for 1 second. But it's about causation. Presumably you believe in cause and effect, where certain causes have certain effects, and it's sort of like a big chain that kind of links things to... Well, the same principle of causation applies to history, not just in physics, but also in history. And the question is, how do you get from Lucretius in the ancient world to 21st century Scotland? There's a lot that comes in between. It's not like ideas sort of get put out there, and they kind of float around, and people can sort of jump up and grab them at any particular time. That's not how causation works. You need to have access to texts, you need to have access to particular institutions and things like that. And all I'm trying to say is, you can go in and research it. These ideas do not just float around in the ether and then come around in the Reformation again, or the Renaissance. They develop out of Protestantism in various different ways. History lies in causation too, and you can just kind of jump from the ancient world to the 21st century. A lot of stuff comes in between, and that stuff is religious, it's Christian.
Well, we're getting some agreeable disagreement, aren't we? Question there? Yeah, and then here.
Okay, so this is a question about education. I have just finished training to be an RE teacher. I have a degree in philosophy, and I'm very much a proponent of philosophy for children. I don't know if that's something that people have heard of, but very briefly, it's not about teaching children about the history of ideas or like what some dead white old guy said about something, but it's about teaching them to think philosophically about all sorts of abstract things. And my experience throughout my training, like my placements, I did often dread teaching, sort of introducing the topic of, for instance, Holy Communion or Jesus, because often the response was, oh gosh, miss, why do you have to do this? I don't believe in anything. And the kids who were religious were very, very quiet about it, whether that's Christianity or Islam, which again I think links back to Liam's point about the marginalisation of religious groups and religious people. So I thought that's one issue I'm going to ask you about later. And the second is, obviously, with the philosophy thing, is the quality of, not the quality of argument, but the quality of, I'm not even sure if quality is the right word, but in terms of when kids say, oh, I don't believe in anything, they don't seem to really think much about what they're saying, and they're not held accountable for that view. So whether they don't believe in anything for, I don't know, my parents said, or because it's all a load of rubbish, they don't seem to have a very clear understanding of the process of their thought, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. So I suppose that's why I think it is important to teach, both philosophically and the content in terms of what different religions teach and what religious people believe. So I think the content is important, and that's why it's RME and not just RE, and I think that is important. So it's sort of a combination. So I would ask, I think Gary probably would be able to be more specifically able to answer the question, but I would like to hear from all of you if you have a comment on this. But what would you propose, in terms of the pedagogical approach to teaching RE, what would you propose, considering the derision that a lot of kids have towards people of a religious background, which I think is disrespectful and needs to be sort of addressed, and also the aspect of philosophical teaching. So what would you propose?
You said you're a proponent of philosophy for children. Are you a sort of Claire Cassidy type?
I'm more of a, I don't know if you've heard of Peter Woolley. I did my training with him. So that's the Philosophy Foundation in London. But I did my PhD at Strathclyde, so Claire Cassidy is there. So I've kind of combined the different approaches.
Well, I mean, so Claire Cassidy developed a postgraduate module for philosophy for children for teaching in or through the larger curriculum within school, because the emphasis from Education Scotland at the moment on religious education is very much about religion. It's about embodying religion, and there are three components within the curriculum in Scotland at the moment. One is Christianity. We're back to privilege again. The second one is world religions, selected for study, again. And the third one is sort of contemporary moral issues. And this one, I don't know what your experience is, but from the teachers and young people I speak to, this is very much the one which is most popular, because it's about debating the issues of the day, the reasons behind it and underlying. I agree, I think, with your suggestion that the level of, I mean, children, a lot of children don't know how to argue. You know, they don't know how to form a philosophical argument. You know, an argument isn't just shouting at each other, it's about forming coherent strands of thought based on evidence and reason and things like that. And I think there's a lot of that lacking. And it comes back to the point you were making, Richard, about the discourse that's often bashed out in the Scotsman and the Herald papers pages. It's not intellectually rigorous. You know, it tends to be just he said, she said type of stuff. So I think there's definitely space. And also, we must remember as well that although there's disagreement between Tim and I, and also between the religious and the humanists among us, that all of us in this room are really weird because we've given up our Saturday mornings to come and discuss this stuff, right? Now, you've got to remember that within the vast range of people in society, that's incredibly unusual.
Yeah.
For the vast majority of people in Western civilizations, the question of religion and belief and philosophy and spirituality is an unexamined question. It's an assumption made and it's no cares given to it. Now, I think that's a tragedy, but I realise that for the vast majority of people it's not. It doesn't even enter into their worldview. So I agree with you. I think that we need much better, rigorous, academic style of philosophy and education. And I do agree that I think religious and moral education would be much better renamed as philosophy. And let's actually go and think deeply and question things.
There's a man in the front row who's been very patiently trying to get in, and then we'll... is there one more over there?
Lady at the back there.
Yeah. And that'll be it, because we're nearly at the end. Yeah.
A short comment. My name is Dabir Tehrani. I'm a Persian coming from Iran. When we talk about closeness of humanism and Christianity, which was mentioned earlier, I should say if there is any religion who is close to humanism, would be more a Zoroastrian religion than Christianity or Jewish or other monastic religions. The first Zoroastrian king, Cyrus the Great, was the first one who had the Declaration of Human Rights. The first Declaration of Human Rights declared by him was written on a piece of stone. He declared that Jewish and Zoroastrians and other religious people should be all treated equally. And from that point of view, humanism, who also is a great supporter of human rights, is closer to Zoroastrian than it is to any other religion. I just wanted to mention this.
Wave the flag for Zarathustra.
Can I just make one little point about the philosophy?
Well, we'll go to that.
Yeah. My eldest son teaches philosophy down in London. And one of the reasons he wanted to go there was religion matters down there because of all the migration and the ethnic groups. So it's a big thing in his school because strong component of Muslim kids and Hindu kids and that. But although he grew up in the manse, and I love him dearly, the two of us, he described himself as an apatheist. He doesn't care if God exists or not. He told me he doesn't have the energy to be an atheist. But the two of us got on really great, and I'm very proud of him. But for him, he accepts that these kids have their religion, but what he wants is for them to philosophically critique it. And he says, rather than bash the religion, if you get them to think for yourself, at least you might end up with a more mature a religion that perhaps can make more of a positive contribution to society, as well as he does make sure that there's one or two little successes along the way of those getting agnostic and atheists. So I think the philosophy is I think it's important in schools, and I think children need to be introduced to it early on.
Final.
Thanks. I have 2 points. The first about teaching. A friend of mine is a primary school teacher, just graduated in Dublin, and she's in a position now where, because of the schools she's came up through and everything, and she's applying for work as a substitute teacher. And what's happening to her, she's discovered in the last year, is that she's getting offers to work only from Protestant schools, right? Because she's Protestant. And she doesn't necessarily believe But what's happening is, in order for her to get work, this is the only offer she's getting, so she's taking those offers, and it's now a burden not only on children but also on the teachers at religious schools, because what's happening is the principals, I kid you not, the principals at the school she substitutes at, look at her address, figure out her local reverend, and then phone them up and ask, do you know this person? So she's in a position now where, since she started to look for work, she has to go to services and things, because otherwise she won't be hired, because she's been pigeonholed into a particular group. And this is one of the major problems that you might not think about when it comes to religious teaching. Another that's happening in Ireland is that when you have religious schools, it's quite easy for them to fill their quota with perhaps local children, and then the burden of everybody else falls to multi-denominational schools, and that can involve other issues in terms of teaching English. But the second point I wanted to make, and hopefully appropriately end with a discussion, was that we had an argument back here where the idea of an afterlife was integral to, I suppose, 1,000 years of Christianity and good deeds, and then we had a follow-up about altruism and the idea of Christianity being altruistic because of an afterlife. And I would say, to my mind, it's actually the opposite. As long as you believe in an afterlife, can your acts of charity truly be altruistic?
Okay, that's quite a handful, and we'll wrap. I'll give them all a wee shot, briefly, please. Yeah.
The point you make about faith schools in Ireland, it's a very similar situation in Scotland. If you want to know why humanists in Scotland get so worked up about education, this is one of the main reasons why. It's not this idea of, the churches once had schools and we want to take them over. It's nothing to do with that. I'm happy to concede the great advancements Christianity brought to education, various different things, materially when they had the power and the money. But this is the point. If you go home and look up and make shame Catholic schools, you'll find that the case, the situation in Scotland at the moment is, if you want to work in a Catholic school, you have to go and find a priest or a bishop who will sign a form to say that you're a fit and reasonable person to represent Catholicism in that school. You'll then have to sign a declaration when you get into the school about the Catholic faith and how you will embody that in your teaching. And if you don't do that, you won't be allowed to teach in that state-funded, local government administrated building. Now that is an absolute disgrace. It's got, for some reason, the European Commission has not ruled against it yet, but I hope very soon it will, and we can end this absolutely outdated practice. It's an absolute disgrace. And also they do the same to children. Falkirk has now introduced a compulsory check on baptismal certificates, so that this is an absolute disgrace, and this is why people get so worked up about education. The idea that you would have this check is an absolute outrage. And I agree more or less with your final point. I just want to, before we have to go very soon, I just want to say that Richard Holloway is one of the people who, when I do get angry and sinister and I start to feel very judgmental about my religious friends, there's often people that pop into my head that challenge my prejudices on these matters, and Richard is definitely one of the foremost that pops in. And I just want to say that the next time that I'm getting all angry and upset with religious people and I think to myself, how can they be so stupid? I'll remember that all of you invited me to come into your church on a Saturday and to tell you what I believe, and that will very much reassure me, so thank you.
Thank you. You have a wee go.
Yeah, what you've described is dreadful. Of course it is. And I agree with Gary actually about the strict requirements necessary for Catholic schools. I think that's also silly. I think, however, you don't need to have that kind of level of extremism and discrimination in order to have some more religious thing. All I'm saying is this, that we live in a pluralist society. There's some people who are religious and some people who aren't. Religious people shouldn't force their beliefs on anyone else, and the non-religious people should do the same. And that, to my mind, means perhaps having some sort of element within the curriculum for religious students who want it and whose families want it. But the question of the afterlife is an interesting one. I think that anyone who does good deeds because they think they're going to be rewarded isn't really a Christian. And I think Jesus would probably agree with that. Jesus is very critical about people in his day who only did good things because they thought, it was what they were required, or what, they got a brownie point from God. That wasn't what he was about. And I don't think it's what genuine Christians are about either. But, and I do think this, I think that knowing that the level of sacrifice that's necessary in Christianity, knowing that if you do give up, and even if you do suffer, that you will have peace in the end, is helpful. But that's different from a reward. That's just a little bit of help along the way, and it helps you to be more sacrificial, and it helps you to keep giving, even when you have no reason to give.
I was going to say something quite profound and short, but I've forgotten it, so I'm going to pass the microphone on.
Well, you're going to find the word right.
Well, I've enjoyed today. Thank you for all coming.
Okay, on your behalf, I thank the panel. I'm glad we did get a wee bit of aggro going. There was some light as well as some heat. So thank you, sir, for throwing a hand grenade onto the platform. No, you're done. I'm not letting you come in again.
One singer, one song.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming. Goodbye.